you're not only honoring me for having made 90 trips around the sun, but we are here, and actually the weather is almost like it was 100+ years ago. Probably somebody's got the exact date was October 17th, 1862. It was a chilly night. And unlike other raids that Quantrill went on, he didn't come yelling into town and making it a big deal. He quietly came into town and began to herd people up on the square here, right where we are. My talk is about 3 families. Of course, there was probably close to 500 people in the community. It talks about whites, and it talks about foreigners that had come in from other countries. But you know, in the material I've read, it doesn't say Indians. Well, I can tell you that the Indians felt threatened here. From my brief association of about 10 years with an Indian church and an Indian brotherhood, there was a resentment, and it wasn't major demonstrations, but they resented signing a treaty that said, this land is yours forever. As long as the rain, as the water flows and the grass grows, this will be your land forever. And that was good for a generation, maybe. Anyhow, the Shawnees were here. Naturally, some of them were mixed blood. The guy that's up behind me here, in the center of the painting, is my Indian friends that sat at the drum. They would know the exact percentage, but his grandfather was Marmaduke van Swearingen, a Dutchman, and he was a man of deep character. He had a good-sized family. Some say in excess of 20 children. Some say that some of them were adopted. But the night of October 17th, everybody had a premonition that Quantrill was coming. And in the case of Blue Jacket and his family, they hid out in the brush or in the cornfield that was close by. Now, Blue Jacket had a 2-story house, log house, that was covered over later with siding. There's another beautiful house just down the street here a little ways that was a 2-story brick house. And it belonged to the first territorial governor, Governor Reeder. It survived the raid, but who built it? Who was the guy that had it to begin with? It was built by Thomas Johnson. That's where the money came from. And when you see this raid and some buildings burned and some buildings still standing, you realize that Quantrill had a catalog. And he came in town, and his men went after certain families and went after certain, but the trouble is, nobody knew who the person on their list was. So everybody took to the tall timber, my ancestor used to say. But we've talked about Charles Blue Jacket, whose ancestor was a Dutchman and whose mother was, of course, Shawnee, and his father was half Shawnee at least. And he was a minister for the Methodist Church. But it wasn't just the Methodist Church, it was the Methodist Church South. So let's think about this a little bit. Here's a guy that's burning the town, but he leaves one building and one building's burned. He's trying to curry the favor of certain people in our town. There's a little German cobbler shop over here on the corner. And it's horrible, but I think his name was Dobler, George Dobler, and his wife's name was Margaret. And they were right off the boat. They were from Germany. And he didn't just repair shoes, he made shoes and boots. And they set his house on fire. He had his business downstairs, and they lived upstairs and then in the back. And here's one of these paradoxes. These mean guys that seem to shoot everybody that said they were for the North or for Union. These same guys went into the burning building that they'd started to burn and went upstairs and got the baby and brought him down, or brought her down. And here's the little cradle up here in the corner. If you'll notice, this is that era, and the soldiers marching represent the trail that went through here that was the old military road that went from the south all the way from Mexico to Canada. And we were on that trail, that military road. I could talk about individuals all around here, but we better stay with the burning of Shawnee if we can. So we've got the Shawnee pastor of the church out here hiding with his family of several children and his wife close by, just north of town here, or north of the square, a little ways, very close to the old military road. And who was his neighbor? His neighbor was Frederick Choteau. He didn't get burned. He had slaves, by the way. There was a fellow that had a shop right on the square here, and he was one of the founders of the lodge here that's still on the square. His name was David G. Campbell, and his father is in a cemetery right on 55th Street. And David G. Campbell had a slave named Cornelius Jackson. And Cornelius stayed with him after the war. We're just digressing all over the place. Now, let's talk a little bit about the man that was killed when he was questioned right here on the square. And I think over on that side of the square, his name was Stiles, and his wife was a school teacher here in Shawnee. Her name was Elizabeth Stiles. And Elizabeth was what we'd call a busybody. And in those days, busybodies were pointed out because at that time, we don't want questions about our relative down the street here and his Confederate friends, or we don't want questions. And she asked questions so that when Quantrill came in town, he pointedly got to Jacob, her husband, and said, "Who do you vote for in the last election?" Well, I don't know if he said Lincoln or not, but he said Union. That was enough. He bought a shot. Very sad. And there was another guy close by there named Baker, and he also was killed for the same answer. If you wore a Union uniform, that was grounds for death sentence. But to talk about Stiles, there's a little sidebar to her story. I have a picture of her somewhere around here. And at the time I painted this picture, I really didn't know anything about Elizabeth Stiles. But she's the one up there holding her husband in her arms. And the sad thing is, you talk about neighbor against neighbor. Her husband was shot twice up here. Once by a fellow by the name of Todd, George Todd. And then by her neighbor, Palmer. And I've got to just interject this one little sidebar. You don't realize how close this is to a lot of people that live here until you mention it to your postmistress. Now, if Liz would remember the name, I don't right now, but she was a pretty lady who took care of the Edwardsville post office. Well, one day I got some material through the mail relating to this battle, this event that took place over here. And she said, "My ancestors were over there." And I said, "Well, what was your ancestor's name?" She said, "Maupin." She said, "They were for the South." And she said, after Quantrill burned Shawnee, it wasn't healthy for us to live there anymore. So you've got the Maupins, you've got the Campbells, David G. Campbell, and others that were for the South. You have buildings that are still standing. I tried to save one of them. It was the wagon master's house. And I don't know Dick Williams' politics. I don't know that he was for the South or the North, but he was from Tennessee. He was born in October, or not October, but in he was born on the 17th of, there was a parallel there. Oh, he was born the 30th on 1830. I was born 1930. So I knew there was a parallel there, but brain fog gets to you. Okay, let's talk about Elizabeth Stiles. I have brain crutches. She was a stylish lady. Elizabeth Stiles. The cobbler dobbler. And I'm not too sure that it was quite pronounced dobbler. But I do know that he had a little shoe shop over here that he made boots and shoes from scratch. It wasn't a repair shop, it was for real. But concerning Elizabeth, she had adopted her sister's children and also one other little girl. And she went up to Leavenworth to complain about what was going on down here, about her husband being shot twice, once by the raiders and once by her neighbor. And they arrested a couple of people, but they let them go. And I want you to know that there was a division even among the military then. There were Missouri people who were in the Union Army. And I can give you examples of men who wanted the Union preserved who were slave owners. So our Civil War was not just a cut and dried thing of, we're the blue and you're the gray. There was a lot of blue-gray and a lot of gray-blue. And case in point, my ancestors were for the South. And I brought in a little cane over there that my dad made from the roof beam or a ceiling beam of our old home place after a tornado went through and tore it apart. He had a lathe and he was going to make a cane for his father and for his uncle, my Uncle Ed. Well, he got about halfway through and lo and behold, here was a lead ball that showed up in the side of the cane. And he said, "What is this?" And they said, "That was the one that was meant for your ancestor. The day that the Confederates came through, or the rebels, after the Battle of Centralia, there was a little skirmish on the road outside. They called it the Battle of Goslin's Lane. And I was talking to a Sons of the Confederacy group here in Shawnee, and lo and behold, here was a guy sitting in the front row, and a tear was going down his face, and he said, "Charlie, my ancestor was there that day." There was a ball, that ball in the cane was meant for my ancestor, and one of his friends that knew him hit the pistol and it went into the ceiling beam instead of into the heart of my ancestor. So there it is. This is how close it is. Here in Shawnee, we've talked about the houses that survived. The jail, jail, was still here on the square. The old brick building up here, which was called Wells Fargo, and Chris Fangrove built it and so forth. Well, I've talked to the Fangrove family, and the old guy that bought the place in 1940, I think it was Tom Haskins. Tom said, "Charlie, I don't know that this was a stage stop, but I can tell you that I've got a garden back there behind our place, and it has the richest ground in Johnson County." And he said, "Every time I plow that place, I pick up harness parts." And he said, "I had a bucket full of harness parts." Well, what happens when you have a changing of teams? Harness parts fall off. So that's just one little archaeological sidebar that points to the possible use of that little building as a stage stop. Not only that, it's just down the street from the old military road. So I can see a loop there and into the square and so forth. Hey, we're supposed to be talking about Quantrill. There was a guy named George Todd that gave a piece of lead, probably a 44 or 36 or something, to Jacob Stiles. And just to add a little bit on to Elizabeth's story, that gal got angry. I mean, really angry. She went to the commandant of Fort Leavenworth. She got two of these guys here from Shawnee arrested. They let them go the next day, but you could tell she was angry. And what did she do next? She wrote to the right people, and she ended up going back to Washington. And she left her little adopted children in a school back there and took the one little 13-year-old with her. And she became a grandmother with her grandchild looking for her Confederate father or husband maybe. Anyhow, it was a story that was told over and over again, and she collected all kinds of intelligence that was used over and over again. At the same time, another guy from Shawnee was doing the same job, a guy by the name of Jimmy Hickok, James Butler Hickok. And he was a policeman out here just west of us in Monticello Township. A good friend, by the way, of our wagon master. His home, his cabin, was burned 3 times in 1868. That tells you a little bit about the feelings out here. I mean, you think about that. That was before the Civil War a few years. A few years after the Civil War, I have a German friend named Maurer who had a home up here. Now we have Maurer Street that runs through here, and that used to be his lane. Well, there was a guy that joined Quantrill shortly after this occurrence, and his name was Jesse James. And Jesse James came into town here early in the morning before the sun rose, and one of his men threw a horseshoe, and right across the street where the Aztec Theater is, or it was the next one over, that was where Earnshaw's blacksmith shop was. Well, Henry Earnshaw got a call early in the morning before anybody got up, and he came down to his blacksmith shop, and there was Jesse James and his gang. Well, he shoed the horses, or the horse, and got a brand new $20 gold piece that the James gang had just taken from Muncie Station over in Kansas City, Kansas. And that's the way that circulation. How'd you like to have that in your collection? Well, hey guys, I've probably left out more than I've talked about here tonight, but I appreciate everybody coming to celebrate the survivors of that terrible event and celebrating our lives here together. Bless your hearts. Thanks for coming.
Wait.
Uh-oh.
You got started before we could do the official presentation to get you started. So now we're going to do it at the end. So those of you watching this in the future, I hope by then you're not wearing these anymore. This is the year 2020. This is Charlie Goslin, the renowned Shawnee artist that you will see his stuff all over our city in this beautiful mural here. And tonight is his 90th birthday. It is October 17th, 2020. And first I have a proclamation. You can stay seated. From the office of the mayor in recognition of Charlie Goslin Day. Whereas Charles was born and raised in Columbia, Missouri, he studied at the Kansas City Art Institute where he met his wife Liz. Charles graduated from the Kansas City Art Institute in 1954, and the couple settled in Shawnee in the mid-1950s and had 2 sons and a daughter. They currently enjoy many grandchildren and great-grandchildren together. And whereas over the past several years, Shawnee has commissioned Goslin for multiple sculptures, murals, and other works. Here's a list of a few of his works on display in Shawnee. Quantrill's Raid on Shawnee Town, a sculpted mold in front of Shawnee City Hall. Remember Your Baptism, a small fountain in the Shawnee United Methodist Church. Taking Time, a sculpture tribute to Chief Charles Blue Jacket in Herman Laird Park at the northeast corner of Cody Street and Johnson Drive. Service Above Self, a sculpture for Shawnee Rotary Club at Listowel Park at the southwest corner of 71st Street and Quivira Road. He called it a hand up to the world, which we really need now. Good Shepherd, a 21-foot high bronze relief at Good Shepherd Catholic Church. Chief Blackfish, 4 stacked stones on American Indian medicine wheel in tribute to Chief Blackfish on the south side of Blackfish Parkway near Summit Street. The Wagon Train at Pioneer Crossing Park. The City Hall mural. And whereas while carving the wagon train at Pioneer Crossing Park, Goslin discovered fossils of seashells, which may still be visible. Goslin's paintings and sculptures have become landmarks around Shawnee and the Kansas City area. Many of his paintings have adorned my home for decades. Whereas Charles Goslin made many Indian friends over the years, including Nathan Longhorn, a descendant of Shawnee Indian chief, is it Tecumseh? Tecumseh?
A direct descendant of Tecumseh.
Yes. Goslin's American Indian friends even blessed some of his artwork, including the stacked stones honoring Chief Blackfish, the Taking Time sculpture at Herman Laird Park, and the mural at Shawnee City Hall. Now therefore I, Michelle Dissler, the mayor of the city of Shawnee, Kansas, do hereby proclaim October 17th, 2020 as Charlie Goslin Day in the city of Shawnee, Kansas, and with a happy birthday to a very special friend, renowned artist, and Shawnee historian with many more years of continued happiness and loving family support. Thank you, Charlie.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for everything that you have done for us. And then, I have another little gift for you later, but for you, your own Charlie Goslin's historical sign,
Woo!
City of Shawnee.
Oh,
So
boy.
Charlie Goslin, special friend, renowned artist, and historian of Shawnee, Kansas, 10/17/2020.
Thank you so much. Oh, my. I never dreamed anything like this would happen. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I am more than happy to continue on if you're not too tired and want to tell us about the mural. But if you don't want to, that's fine. But if you do, I'd be more than happy to stay and listen, and I think everybody else would too.
Well, let me just point out a few parts of it. First of all, the area in the back there, the flowers, that's one of these politically correct things. How do you put up symbols of Germany and Belgium and France and Scotland? I can tell you how. You don't have to go to their coats of arms. You just check out the flowers, because they all have some kind of a flower that's a symbol of their country. And guess what? This wonderful state of ours, the sunflower state. So we got sunflowers on both sides. Our little town used to be called Gum Spring. And there's a lot of springs around here, and water was a major item in settling a community. There's actually water running through old Shawnee town up there. And I think at one time there was a mill up there, Pantle's Mill. We talked about the surviving buildings that survived the horrible burning, but how about those that were burned? There was a hotel right behind me here. It was on the north side of the square. Higgins House, 2-story, beautiful hotel, burned to the ground. There was a dry goods store over here, and we got a pretty good idea of where it was because the guy rebuilt right on the same side. It was Archer's store. And the little shoe shop over here, we know it was burned. And we have roughly 14 other buildings that were burned up here close to the square. I have a feeling that Quantrill, after having burned Olathe and realizing this was right on the military road, he didn't want to stay around here too long. They say, depending on what you read, you have him here at midnight. But I have found at least 7 reliable sources that said they were out of here by 9 o'clock. They probably came in around 8 o'clock and they were gone by 9. This is, of course, de Bourmont, the early French explorer that was out here. And just north of here, on the Missouri River, there was a little fort that was built before we were a nation, Fort de Cavagnon. You can see 2 log buildings right above the Indian there. That, by the way, is Tenskwatawa the prophet. And below him is Frederick Choteau. By the way, he was an artist. I'd like to see some of his work sometime. But Frederick Choteau was an artist. And this is Blue Jacket as a young man. When he first came out here, he's got that blue shirt on. Cyprian Choteau's right next to his brother there. And right next to their head is the council house. And the best I can tell, it was built in the early 20s, the 1920s. The site of the council house was up here in McInerney Estates, and we put a marker there with various Indian clans on the marker. Now, right across from it is a log church, and that's the little church that's up here in the Indian. By the way, it survived the burning of Shawnee, Methodist Church South. And forgive me, history, for saying this, because this same minister, Charles Blue Jacket, was a captain in the Union Army at the Battle of Westport. So don't tar him with the brush that he was from the South and was a Southern Methodist. He was a Christian gentleman who fought for his neighbors. No question about it. Up here, this is the wagon master and his wife, and that's their home up there. The one that I mentioned survived the battle. By the way, the council house and the Methodist church were both used for the same purpose. It was used as an Indian council house during the period that it was there, not only as a worship place for the Methodists, but also for the so-called pagan Indians. I think I'd prefer traditional people. Dick Williams and his wife Margaret. Margaret seems to show up pretty often. There's Sam Garrett right next to the one in the white beard, and the one in the dark beard there is Jack Garrett, who's, by the way, their relatives were here as recently as just a few years ago, and there may be some relatives still here. There's William Hickok, James Butler Hickok, with his pistol up in the air. And then as you go around the corner, right in the corner up there is Quantrill. And the story of the burning, and then the Reconstruction era, and you'll see a silhouette of a person that are hanging there. And Guy, one of the dark pages of our history, but I want to add it to it. The Indians used to lose their horses quite frequently. People from down around Higginsville came up here and resupplied their horses from Delaware horses and Shawnee horses. People over in Edwardsville, the Delaware village, at night, on certain times of the year, they would keep their horses in their cabins because they knew that if they left them out, they wouldn't be there in the morning. So, some of our neighbors from the east here, probably some of my ancestors, who knows, that came over here and stole horses. After the Civil War, the toleration of horse thieves went to a new low, and we had an organization called the Horse Thief Association. And they used to meet right over there in the lodge hall. And they used to take their victims down here and hang them in what is now the cemetery on 55th Street. And my old buddy, Gene Amos, you gave me a little clue, an archaeological clue. He said, if you want to find a potter's field where poor people are buried, you go to a place where there's no tombstones and all the graves are kind of sunk in. He said a modern cemetery fills in those graves and smooths them out. But if you want to see a potter's field where the horse thieves were buried, go down here on 55th Street, and there's a beautiful stone that's there for Campbell, only it's not David G. Campbell, it's his father. And I think it's Alexander Campbell. You can check on me down there. But you look to the right and to the left, and there's almost a block of graves that are, you could just see dimples in the earth. And they line up in rows. So row on row, I'd guess at least 40 or 50 down there, maybe more. But there was when I was blessed by being selected as the the Grand Marshal of old Shawnee days back in, I think, 81 or something like that. There was a young man about my age, and I mean the age I am now. He about 90, and I can't remember his name for anything. But he came up riding on a horse, and his son came riding on a horse, and his grandson came riding on a horse. 3 of them together in that parade. I said, that's my winner of a heritage riders in the old Shawnee Town parade. And he told me, so you guys are going to, somewhere it's written down, you can find it. But he was nearly killed in a covered wagon when he was a little baby going up to Nebraska. And then they moved back down here. but he said, Charlie, the only thing I can tell you about that old cemetery is my dad used to call that the horse thief cemetery. And he said, there was a tree that my dad put up a bag swing for, and he said that was the hanging tree. It was a big old shagbark hickory. So now you know what I know about the horse thief cemetery. But someday, when you don't have anything else to do, go by there and take a look at it, because that is an archaeological site. It's just like my archaeologist friends tell me, Charlie, if you want to find an ancient site, go to it and watch where the water runs. And I have found in Pompeii, Italy, artifacts that were washed out of the side of the bank. And that's true of Indian arrowheads. That's true of ancient coins. That's true of bones that show up. So I'll commission you all as Shawnee archaeologists. Go out and dig. You don't have to dig too deep. Let nature dig for you. Anytime you find a little stream, take a look. That kid up there used to find buffalo skulls on the sandbars in the Kaw River that dated back to early times. They call them paleo fossils. Okay, guys, you've been so attentive, and I've given you so much useless information. Thank you for coming. God bless you.
Thank you, Dad. Please, everybody, we want you to grab a cookie or two. We have water. So the cookies are in celebration of Charlie's 90th birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Charlie. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you so much. Sharon Euler back there, she's our historian from this place too. She used to work for you, Charlie, till what?
Till last week.
Last week.
7 days, 4 hours.
Thanks for coming, Sharon. And thank you all for coming.